Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into the incredible and honestly deeply misunderstood truth about Rapa Nui, which you probably know better as Easter Island. We're looking at one of the absolute most remote inhabited islands on the entire planet. Now, for generations, this place has totally captured the global imagination, but the main story we've all been told, well, as you'll see, it's likely completely wrong. It's a genuine historical puzzle. For centuries, outsiders looked at these massive monuments and wondered exactly this. How on earth did a society without modern machinery, without wheels, and without large draft animals move stone statues weighing up to 80 tons across miles of incredibly rough terrain? Most outsiders just assumed the builders must have gone on some frenzy of environmental destruction to move them, literally destroying their own island in the process. But the indigenous people, the Rapa Nui, well, they told a very different story. And this is where the history gets both fascinating and, frankly, a little bit tragic. The people who built these magnificent statues had an explanation all along. They knew exactly how the massive stones were transported. But for a really long time, Western researchers just brushed off their accounts as mere folklore or a cute metaphor. The incredible part is that modern science is only now starting to actually listen to what the Rapa Nui had to say, and it is completely shifting our understanding of history. So picture this. Rapa Nui was settled by these incredible Polynesian voyagers, somewhere between 1200 and 1250 CE, and they navigated thousands of miles of open ocean to get there. Today, the island is home to nearly 900 of these monolithic statues, called moai. They were carved primarily from volcanic tuff at a single main quarry called Rongorongo. And just seeing them situated in the landscape, it really gives you a sense of the immense, almost unbelievable scale of this cultural achievement. Okay, let's jump into Section 1, the masterpiece, Engineering the Moai. To really wrap our heads around the scale of what we're talking about here, let's look at the sheer numbers. Your average moai statue weighs roughly 14 tons and stands about 13 feet tall. That alone is incredibly impressive without modern machinery. But the largest statue they ever successfully erected was over 30 feet tall. And some of the wider, denser moai, they weigh more than 80 tons. There is even an unfinished statue still resting at the quarry, nicknamed El Gigante, that would have towered at nearly 70 feet if completed. That is practically a 7-story building. The ambition here is just staggering. And this brilliantly illustrates a super common misconception. Notice how these moai are positioned on these long stone platforms, which are called a hu. Now, pop culture almost always depicts the Easter Island statues looking out to the sea, staring into the horizon, right? Actually, scratch that. Archaeologically, they were placed facing inland. They were deliberately positioned to watch over the villages, representing watchful ancestors overseeing and protecting their descendants. Moving right along to Section 2, the myth, the ecological suicide theory. So, you might be wondering, how did outsiders try to explain moving these giants? Well, it led to a tragic, totally victim-blaming narrative that completely dominated the 20th century. For a long time, the mainstream theory was that the Rapa Nui moved these statues using wooden sledges and massive log rollers. This idea was heavily popularized by writers like Jared Diamond in his widely read book, Collapse. The narrative claimed the society committed quote-unquote ecological suicide. The theory basically argued that the islanders were so obsessed with monument building that they cut down literally every single tree on their island to create rollers, which then triggered massive soil erosion, starvation, internal warfare, and a completely self-inflicted population collapse long before Europeans ever even arrived. But there was always a massive contrast here. While outside researchers were busy theorizing about sledges and ecological destruction, the Rapa Nui oral tradition consistently maintained a very specific and frankly mind-bending account. They insisted that the statues literally walked to their final locations. And for decades, Western scientists just rolled their eyes at this. They assumed it was just a symbolic myth or a magical legend, entirely dismissing the possibility that it was actually a technical description. Which brings us to Section 3, the truth, how the statues walked. Fast forward to 2012. Researchers Terry Hunt and Carl Lipo decided to actually test the Rapa Nui oral tradition. They built an exact scale replica of a moai, attached ropes to very specific points on the head, coordinated a surprisingly small team, and began to pull. By applying a side-to-side rocking motion, they proved that a moai replica could genuinely be walked upright down a path. It's kind of like how you'd shimmy a heavy refrigerator across a kitchen floor. The heavy belly of the statue allowed it to lean forward naturally, and the rocking motion created a kinetic walk. They essentially shimmied a multi-ton monolith down a road, matching the indigenous Rapa Nui account perfectly. no massive logging operations required. Talk about an absolute paradigm shift. This research proved that the Rapa Nui oral history wasn't just folklore, and it wasn't a myth. It was a literal, physically accurate description of incredible engineering. The islanders weren't relying on magic, and they certainly weren't destroying their forests for rollers. They were using applied physics and deep engineering knowledge to walk the stones. Let's pivot to Section 4, the Lost Voices, the Mystery of Rongorongo. Before we look at the real cause of the island's collapse, we have to talk about what was tragically lost. Easter Island is home to Rongorongo, which is a completely unique system of beautiful, intricate glyphs carved into wooden tablets. The script is found only on Rapa Nui and literally nowhere else in the Pacific. And the craziest part? To this day, it remains entirely undeciphered. Linguists still fiercely debate whether it represents a true, complex writing system or if it was a mnemonic device used to aid memory during ritual recitations. There is a pretty devastating number associated with this script: 30. There are fewer than 30 authenticated Rongorongo tablets that survive today. Obviously, this severely limits our ability to understand them. But the real tragedy is why the knowledge of how to read them was lost. It wasn't because the society just slowly forgot over time. It was because the specific individuals who held the knowledge of how to read them were violently taken from the island. And that leads us to our final part, Section 5, the true story, contact, not collapse. If we look at the actual timeline based on modern archaeological evidence, the story shifts entirely. The island was settled in the 1200s. Now, deforestation did happen over the centuries, but it was likely driven by gradual land clearance for agriculture and, critically, by the introduction of Polynesian rats. Yep, rats. They multiplied rapidly and ate the native palm seeds, which severely hindered forest regeneration. Yet, the society adapted and survived. The true population collapse didn't happen until after 1722, when the first recorded European contact introduced devastating diseases. And then, the absolute breaking point occurred in the 1860s, when Peruvian slave raids forcibly removed a massive portion of the population, including their leaders and the exact people who could read Rongorongo. So when you put it all together, the combination of indigenous oral history and modern archaeology reveals something really profound. Rapa Nui was a highly adaptable, remarkably resilient society. Their most severe crisis came entirely from outside contact, from foreign diseases and brutal slave raids, not from destroying their own environment to build monuments. The whole ecological suicide narrative was just a complete misreading of the evidence. As it says right here, Easter Island's real story isn't really about a society that destroyed itself. Instead, it's a story about a brilliant Polynesian culture that solved a genuinely difficult engineering problem. They figured out how to move 80-ton monuments using nothing but ropes, human coordination, and physics, a feat that outsiders arrogantly dismissed as a childish myth for over a century. The statues never stopped standing. It was the story about them that needed correcting. So I'll leave you with this to think about. How much of our history have we completely misunderstood simply because we refuse to listen to the people who actually lived it?